Welcome to Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety, where we talk about the real issues out on the road, focus on safe driving, and learn industry best practices from your hosts Kenny Ray, Mike Bohan, and Jim Seibert, in the hopes that by driving the line, we get more drivers home safe and sound. This podcast was made possible by Marsh McLennan Agency.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode number 10 of Driving the Line, the trucking podcast that is always in the pursuit of safety. This is Jim Seibert, along with my friends and co-hosts Kenny Ray and Mike Bohan. We're extremely glad that you chose to be with us today. Gentlemen, today we are discussing the summer heat. You can't beat the heat like the summer heat. I know it's a safe assumption from where both of you live in Missouri and Texas, as well as me here in Oklahoma. It can get downright hot, so hot that it can just paralyze your daily outdoor activities. What kind of summer jobs did you guys have when you were growing up?
Of course, living out in a rural area, we talked about this earlier amongst the host here, but if you weren't picking up square bales when you were a kid out where I lived, you weren't really working too much. But that was something you don't see much anymore. But I did a lot of that when I was a kid. But one of the things that my brother and I did in town, we lived right on the edge of a little bitty town in northeast Missouri, and we started a mowing business. And you see those all the time now that are kind of big businesses. They're they've got fleets of vehicles and a bunch of workers and mowers and stuff like that. And my brother and I had a little bitty Aaron's rear engine riding mower that we hooked a trailer to and had a weed eater and a push mower in it too. And we'd go around and mow 30 or 40 yards a summer for folks that couldn't get out and do it themselves. And we thought we were really doing something there. We made a lot of money just running around our little town mowing yards. So that was really, outside of working on farms and picking up bales, doing stuff like that, that was really one of my first jobs was mowing yards and talking about heat. I still remember, I remember the lady's yard I was mowing. Her name was Vera Beal. And there was one day it was hot like you're talking about, Jim. And she had 2 yards there, hers and her mother's. And I got overheated and I had to have my folks come up and help me finish mowing the yard because it just got too much, got stressed out because of the heat. But I'll never forget that because it was the only time I really had kind of a heat related issue. But it was back when I was a kid mowing yards in Edina, Missouri.
You know, guys, we all three of us come from a rural and farm backgrounds, even though we're all in the safety business now. And like Mike, I hauled hay when I was a high school kid, and I was always grateful when football season started and two-a-days started. Those of us that had worked outside during the summer, whether we were hauling hay or mowing pastures or whatever we were doing, we were always much more prepared for two-a-days than those kids, some of my classmates that were probably more fortunate than me in terms of financial assets. They didn't have to work during the summer. And they hung out in the air conditioning all year. And when two-a-days started, the coach didn't have any mercy on them at all. And they were struggling in that heat. So it's like Mike said, I remember how hot it was, how humid it was. And there would be days you'd come in from the hayfield and you just were hurting to the point it'd make you sick. And so, you think about a high school kid, 15, 16, 17, 18 years old, that's probably in the very best shape of their life. And they still have that sort of impact of being out working in a hot environment. You take our truck drivers today that are, and we know from pure statistics that our trucking community is older than the average U.S. workforce. And they primarily work a sedentary job, sitting in an air-conditioned truck most of the day. But then there's times they have to be out in it. And my point is, we can take the analogy of a kid that's in great shape and how the heat impacted them, and then take an older adult that's out in it, and those effects can be magnified tremendously. So it's interesting you ask about summer jobs, Jim, because it's very, very applicable to our listening audience today.
Yeah, some of you know that I'm originally from South Central Nebraska, and if I wasn't on one uncle's farming operation, I was on the other, and putting in and fixing miles of fence, roguing soybeans, detasseling corn gets chest high. The pivots are going. You got irrigation, humidity, plus the heat, and now that I'm transplanted to Oklahoma, and a little bit less irrigation, but it seems like the degrees went up a few. Yeah, those summer jobs, when I think of that and being young, I think of coming into the house after a really hard, hot day and laying on the tile floor in either the kitchen or the bathroom and taking a nice cool off.
Amen, brother.
I've had to teach my kids that trick. So we know this heat can be an absolute problem for our operations, and it can suck the life right out of you. So much so that OSHA identified it as a hazard to be mitigated, and they installed a national emphasis program for outdoor and indoor heat-related hazards in April of 2022. They also provide many, many resources on their website, OSHA.gov. There's flyers, there's break room posters, many tools at your disposal for free online there. Some of the information that they've shared is that nearly 3 out of 4 heat illness fatalities happen during the first week of work for these employees. New and returning workers need to build that tolerance to the heat back up by taking frequent breaks at work, working shorter shifts in the heat to start, and that dangerous heat is not just related to outside work. It can also happen indoors in shops. This time, I'm going to share some of OSHA's suggested safety practices, and let's see how we can relate these to our trucking listeners out there and any others that are listening and can apply it to their operation. Employers, you guys can keep your workers safe by following some of these safety practices here. Following the 20% rule. On the first day, you don't allow employees to work more than 20% of a shift at the full intensity of the heat. Increase their time by no more than 20% a day until the workers are used to working in the environment. Provide cool drinking water. Encourage the workers to drink at least 1 cup every 20 minutes, even if they're not thirsty. We talk about that in many industries. Big push in the service of water consumption. There's a maximum amount of water that you can drink in a day before it can have a reverse effect. But monitoring you, your buddies, your coworkers' water intake is all a part of watching out for each other and is a good practice. Rest breaks, allowing workers time to recover from heat in shady or cool places. So this one struck me that a trucker can be in air conditioning a lot during the day, but it doesn't take much time outside to show signs of a heat exposure. And that is, we could be pulling in to a rest stop where we've got to get our break in. We're walking around, getting a little bit of exercise. We're getting exposed to heat after coming from a cool environment. And if we're not prepared or used to that, can have an effect on us and our awareness. And if we're not drinking fluid and we get out and we're doing some sweating, it can dehydrate us. What about breakdowns? Kenny, we got a flat tire or a blowout. We've got an equipment breakdown on the side of the road. You see any applicability there?
Yeah, and Jim, when you're talking about breakdowns, a lot of it depends on where a driver is. I mean, if they break down in downtown Houston, they're no more than 15 or 20 minutes away from getting help. And y'all know I'm in Texas. When you start getting out in the western part of our state and then going on west, so I'm thinking now along the lines of New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, western Utah. If we've got drivers that run those states, I want to encourage you men and women, you should never, ever, ever be out in that part of the world without at least a flat of water or a case of bottled water in your truck, even if it's at room temperature. because in y'all picture the Texas geography in West Texas from Midland to El Paso, which partially on I-20 and the rest on I-10, it's 300 miles. And just between those two cities, between Midland, Texas and El Paso, Texas, and it's virtually unoccupied land. It's 300 miles of desert. And if you break down out there, you are 3, 4, maybe 5 hours away from getting any help to come help you. And it would be critical at that point in the middle of the summer to at least have some drinking water in that truck, even if it's at room temperature and you don't have it in a fridge. That literally could keep you alive. So, yeah, we don't often think about breakdowns when we're talking about heat illness, but y'all just start paying attention as you drive up and down the interstate. The number of trucks that are broke down on the side of the road, he'll have his triangles out. He'll have the hood tilted forward. He's waiting on road service to get there. And you'll notice if the tractor's not running, if it's an engine issue, he's sitting there with the windows rolled down because it gets hot inside that cab real quick.
Next point is dress for heat. And this is one that for the longest time just really annoyed me, being a service member that used to be able to roll our sleeves back in the early 2000s and late 90s. And we liked the look, but when we started into war and went to combat, with sleeves down at all times. And as you look at workers out in the field, roofers, construction folk on the road that are wearing pants and they're wearing long sleeves, and many of them are wearing headgear. And man, it's so hot out. Why are they wearing that? Well, the point is to keep the sweat next to the body longer, which is our cooling mechanism. If we're wearing shorts and flip-flops and t-shirts, the sweat is evaporated off of our skin at a much higher rate, and it's not afforded the opportunity to do its job to cool us off. So that's another good idea of having certain clothes, a hat that can shade your face and neck from the sun, and having different clothes kept inside the truck in case a situation was to arise. Watching out for each other. So this is a big one in most workplaces. Communication, if you're over the road, talking, checking in with other drivers as you may pass them, or talking in the lots, asking those questions of caring about one's health at the time of, hey, you drinking water, you staying out of the heat, looking for any signs of heat illness, including fainting, dizziness, nausea, muscle spasms. Those are the precursors to the heat stroke. Offer training on the hazards of heat exposure. Now I'm talking to the employers. So this is a part of your training program and a curriculum that you should have for your employees. And in whatever avenue that you deliver that to them in, the hazards of heat exposure needs to be amongst them. And just like Kenny relayed there, having a plan, thinking forward and being prepared for situations that might arise. And then final point that OSHA makes is develop an emergency action plan. So what is our plan if we have a breakdown and one of our employees is on the side of the road? What phone numbers, what service providers do we have at our disposal to minimize their exposure, to get our driver and our cargo back on the road? And you guys have any closing thoughts on those bullet points?
Well, one of the things that I was thinking of when you were going down through that stuff, Jim, is you had mentioned, and it's true, a lot of our folks out there that are listening that are driving trucks, they have the ability, as long as they're not broke down, they have the ability to be in an air-conditioned cab of a truck for long periods of time. But then you start thinking about certain types of subsections of our industry, like the flatbedders who are out, throwing straps over a load or maybe putting tarps on it, or certain hazmat carriers, things like that. They may be exposed to heat more than somebody that's just a drop and hook operation, things like that. But regardless of the type of operation, every point that you mentioned is applicable. And I feel like it's important for our listeners to know just like in the wintertime when we prepare for the cold weather, we need to think about and prepare for the hot weather. It's just something we need to do. And we've kind of have somewhat of a recurring theme through our podcast. It's talking about keeping your trucks in good working order and making sure you're keeping yourself as a driver in good working order. And that's what we're talking about here. So if you're a driver out there listening to us, make sure that you're taking the necessary steps when you're out on the road to protect yourself from being overheated. Stay hydrated, eat right, get good rest. Because once you get dehydrated, it's really hard to bounce back from that. It's not like you're going to drink a bottle of water and bounce back from being severely dehydrated. It's just going to take more than that, especially if you're in an environment where the heat's just excessive. So great points, Jim. I'm glad we had this talk for our listeners, because I feel like it's very important, because we truly want to protect the health of our drivers.
Jim, you talked about one of the things is looking out for each other, and truck drivers normally work in isolation. It's one part of the job most of them actually like. They like being in that truck by themselves, and it's part of their world. But when drivers are out in really, really hot weather, and it's not just the temperature, it's also a function of humidity. And, for us in Texas, really all across the Gulf South, from the eastern half of Texas all the way through Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and Florida into the Carolinas, humidity is a big issue for us as it is the heat, because we'll have some days in August where it'll be close to 100 degrees and close to 100% humidity, and it won't be raining. It's like being inside a greenhouse. It's just miserable beyond imagination. And a driver can get in trouble pretty quick like that when it's those kind of conditions, particularly if you're talking about some of the clothing they have to wear. Y'all know I came out of the hazmat world, and most hazmat tanker drivers, they have to wear FR, fire resistant clothing, which is always long sleeve. It's a very heavy fabric that's got some special fire retardants built into it. They're very uncomfortable. But they're going in and out of these refineries, and the refineries require them to have the FR on. I was thinking one of the most miserable jobs I've ever seen in the trucking industry, again, coming out of the hazmat world, for carriers that haul Class 8 corrosives, particularly acids and alkalis in tank trailers. They have to be in attendance when they're unloading those products, and they normally have to wear a full rubber suit. I know it's technically not rubber, but it basically is a corrosion resistant suit. And it's literally either a full length apron or pants and the top, rubber gloves. And a lot of times they'll even have a hood on over their hard hat. They're basically encapsulated, if you will, in a little miniature greenhouse. And they're standing out in the Texas heat when it's 100 degrees, 100% humidity. And sometimes it takes 2.5, 3 hours to unload an acid trailer if they're having to pump that product off. And it's the one area in my former life where I saw most drivers getting in trouble. It just saps them. And you were talking at first about the acclimation process where OSHA says, well, 20% the first day, 20% the next day, and incrementally. But a truck driver really can't do that, because their exposure in the heat is always incremental. It's always episodic. They may drive 6, 7, 8, 10 hours today, and then the danger for a truck driver is when they're out having to load or unload. And those are very small parts of their day, but it's when they're most susceptible and most exposed to this heat. And you mentioned one other thing. I know we have a lot of owners of trucking companies that listen to this podcast, and we're grateful that y'all do. We are thrilled to death when y'all tune in. But also, in addition to your drivers, think about your mechanics. They're out in the shop. They may have big shop fans, but I've never been in a truck shop that was air conditioned. I've been in a bunch of them that's got big fans, but those mechanics are out in the heat usually all day. And this acclimation process really would work very well for them. And again, coming out of the hazmat tanker industry, think about your employees that are working on a tank wash. When they're, cleaning the inside of these tank trailers out with hot soapy water, and they're having to wear protective PPE as well. So, and Jim, one other thing, and we kidded about this a little bit off the broadcast, but I think it's applicable, and we're always very respectful of our audience, and we know we have some female listeners that listen to the audience. So please know that I'm not being inappropriate in any way. But years ago, the United States military developed a set of I just call them urine charts. They may have a technical name, but we have stole those in the trucking industry. And it's basically a little color chart that's printed on a piece of 8.5 by 11 paper, and you tape it to the wall in the restroom. And while your employees are in there going to the restroom, they basically look at the color of their urine and compare it to this color chart, and it gives them a pretty accurate, not scientific in a lab, but it gives them a pretty accurate representation of how dehydrated or hydrated they are. And we use those in the hazmat world, and they are very, very effective. Now, truck drivers will laugh and cut up and kid about it, but I've had many of them walk into my office and say, hey, I just was looking at the chart and I need to be drinking some water. So, and those are really, really good things. And so any of our companies that are, if you need to reach out to us, we've told you can email us, you can connect with us on social media, on LinkedIn or whatever. And if you don't have access to those, we'll be glad to send them to you. And that is a very, very, very helpful tool to help keep your drivers and your mechanics safe. And it's an easy thing to do, very easy thing to do.
Gentlemen, those are excellent additions. I appreciate you being with me today. To our listeners, if you need any more information, reach out to your trusted risk consultant. And like Kenny said, don't fail to reach out to us if we can be of assistance. In the next episode of Driving the Line, we're going to discuss the National Safety Council's annual emphasis during National Safety Month. Until then, for Kenny and Mike, I'm Jim. Stay safe. Thanks for joining us on Driving the Line. We'll talk to you next time.
That's all the time we have for this episode of Driving the Line, the Pursuit of Safety. We hope you enjoyed our discussion, and thank you for listening. You can rate, review, and subscribe to Driving the Line, the Pursuit of Safety on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or any other app you're using. You can also follow Marsh McLennan Agency on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Until next time, thanks again for listening. Drive safely, everyone.